I found out my parents had given the family metal shop to my sister's husband, so I stopped working 80-hour weeks for free. A week later, my dad called in a panic. Our biggest client is about to leave. I said quietly, "That's the new owner's problem." Full story with all updates. Start with a deep, slightly pained but resolute tone. Can you imagine pouring your entire life, every ounce of sweat, every sleepless night, into building a legacy you believed was yours, only to discover it was all signed away? Not just signed away, but sold out from under you, to someone who didn't even know how to turn on the machines? And then, when their world completely imploded, they had the audacity to call me, begging for help. Do you want to know what I told them? You're about to find out. My name is Olivia. I'm 32, and for a decade, I was the unseen force behind my family's metal shop in Green Bay. 80 hours a week, sometimes more. No paycheck, no insurance, just the unshakable promise that one day, the legacy my grandfather built with his bare hands, would be mine. Every burn, every scar, every back-breaking night in front of those screaming CNC machines, it all felt worth it. I was earning my future. Then, one cold Friday night, sifting through quality control files, I found it. A sealed folder marked confidential. Inside were transfer documents giving full ownership of the shop to my sister's husband, Ched, a man who barely knew the difference between steel and aluminum. I remember standing there, under the buzzing fluorescent light, my hands black with cutting oil, the weight of a decade hitting me all at once. 10 years of my life, just signed away. I quit the next morning. A week later, my father called. His voice was trembling. "Olivia, our biggest client, Steelcore Dynamics, is about to leave. Please, we need you back." I took a slow breath. My voice was steady, calm. Let the air handle it. I grew up in the hum of machines, the intoxicating smell of cutting oil, in a world that never truly slept. The industrial zone near the bay was a concrete maze, alive with sparks and the shouts of men over roaring compressors. I was the only woman who worked there full-time, the only one who could change a carbide insert faster than most guys could finish their coffee. They used to stare, half curious, half doubtful, waiting for me to quit. But I didn't. I stayed. I learned every sound those machines made, every vibration, every smell that signaled something was wrong. This shop, it was in our blood. My grandfather built it in 1970 with one battered CNC mill and a dream. When he passed, my father took over. He wasn't a dreamer like Grandpa, but he loved the business. I wanted to make him proud. After high school, while my sister Claire chased marketing dreams in Chicago, I immersed myself in technical school. I wanted to program the machines, design the fixtures, make metal behave the way I wanted. When I graduated, I came straight back to the shop. I thought I'd earned my place the old-fashioned way, by showing up earlier and staying later than everyone else. And I did. We grew, from 6 mills to 10, 3 lathes to 5. We took on medical device and aerospace contracts. I ran the machines. I designed custom fixtures. I handled quality control. If a part had to be within 3 microns, it was my responsibility. If a customer needed an emergency job on a Friday night, I was the one who stayed until dawn. The work was brutal. The machines ran hot and loud. My hands were permanently rough, my nails trimmed short because long nails didn't survive. I learned to read the machines by ear. A faint chatter meant a dull tool. A deeper hum meant the spindle load was too high. When others were stumped, I'd listen for 10 seconds and know exactly which offset to tweak. They called it intuition. I called it obsession. Clients started asking for me by name. Engineers from huge firms sent blueprints directly to Olivia at Heart Metal Works. One even joked, "If she's on the job, we can stop worrying about the specs." Every compliment made the endless hours lighter. And every time my father said, "You're the future of this place, kiddo," I believed him. It was a promise carved into my chest. I never asked for a paycheck. My parents said the money was being reinvested, that I was building equity. "One day, this will all be yours, Olivia," my mother would whisper, touching my shoulder as I came home covered in grime. I smiled because I believed her. I didn't need contracts or titles. I had trust. I had family. And I had my hands, the same hands that once fit inside my grandfather's gloves, now calloused and steady, shaping metal the way he taught me. For 10 years, I gave that shop everything. 80 hours a week, sometimes more. The machines didn't stop, and neither did I. I'd wake before dawn, my alarm blaring at 4:30 a.m., my back already aching before 30. By 5, I was there, the cold air thick with metal dust. I'd prep the CNC mills, load programs, calibrate offsets. By the time anyone else showed up, the first run was already done. "You're doing it for yourself," my father would say. "You're building your own future." My mother would nod, smiling. "When it's yours, you'll be grateful." So I believed them. I believed the long nights, the skipped dinners, the birthdays spent at the shop were all part of some greater plan. The truth is, I didn't have a life outside those walls. My friends stopped inviting me out years ago. I missed weddings, holidays, even my sister's baby shower. When I wasn't at the shop, I was asleep. When I wasn't asleep, I was thinking about the shop. My hair, once long and shiny, was constantly singed from welding sparks. I had scars on my forearms from hot shavings, nails split and gray from the oil, but I wore them like medals. My body begged for rest, but pain was just proof I was earning something. "You're the future of this place." That phrase made the fatigue bearable. Vacations, not in my vocabulary. When the crew took time off, I covered their shifts. "The business can't run without you," Dad said once, half joking. I smiled, not realizing it was truer than he meant. Once, when I took a weekend off, I came back to 2 jobs behind schedule. "See what happens when you're gone," my father said. From then on, I never left. I told myself it was loyalty. Deep down, it was fear. Fear that, if I wasn't there, they'd prove I wasn't needed. Love was another casualty. I tried dating a civil engineer named Mark. He was kind, patient, fascinated by my work. But after a few months of canceled dinners and rescheduled weekends, he stopped calling. I couldn't even promise him a Friday night. "You always say you're almost done," he said quietly one night, phone pressed to my ear. "But you never are." He was right. I never was. The shop became both my cage and my cathedral. The hum of the machines felt like purpose. The finished parts gleaming under the lights felt like pride. And when my parents walked through the door, smiling at the efficiency reports, it felt like approval, the kind I'd spent my entire life chasing. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I became indispensable, they would see me not just as a daughter, but as an equal. Small doubts crept in, though, like when my father handed my sister a check for helping with marketing, even though she hadn't set foot in the shop for years. Or when my mother said, Chad might take the business to another level once he gets more involved. My stomach tightened. I pushed it down. Family is family. I told myself not to compare. I believed merit, like gravity, would eventually pull things into balance. But it never did. Looking back, my biggest mistake wasn't working too hard. It was believing fairness would just happen, that loyalty would lead to justice. I was wrong. In a family business, merit doesn't always win. Sometimes it's silenced. Sometimes it's quietly replaced. And sometimes you don't realize you've been erased until it's already too late. It was around 2020 when Chad Walker entered my life, or rather invaded it. He arrived in pressed shirts, polished shoes, and a practiced confidence of someone who'd read more business books than he'd lived real days in a factory. My sister Claire brought him home, glowing. "Chad just finished his MBA at Northwestern. He's brilliant, Olivia. You'll love how his mind works." Brilliant. The word hung in the air like cheap perfume. It was the same word people used when they didn't have evidence of actual skill. I shook his hand. His grip was too firm, his smile too white. "So, you're the engineer," he said like I was some novelty. "That's impressive. Women in manufacturing, that's rare." I forced a smile. I'd heard that line before, but never with such condescension. A few months later, my parents announced Chad would be joining the family business to modernize operations. Supposedly, he was there to digitize processes, build the brand, develop partnerships. The truth? He spent his first week walking around with his phone, taking photos of machines he didn't understand, posting them on Instagram. Innovation never sleeps. My parents were ecstatic. "Look at the engagement," my mom beamed. "He's bringing us into the modern age." Meanwhile, I was crawling under a jammed CNC lathe, covered in oil and metal dust. I looked at him across the shop, me in heavy gloves, sweat pouring down my neck. Him, sipping a $10 latte, scrolling on his tablet, and I saw how differently the word work could look. Chad's schedule was generous. He'd show up around 10:30, sometimes 11, Starbucks in one hand, Bluetooth in the other. "Just had a call with a potential partner," he'd say, even though his screen showed ESPN scores. He'd stay for a few hours, disappear for lunch, return around 3, usually just in time to make one more post or chat with suppliers I'd already handled. By 4:30, he was gone. And yet, unlike me, Chad got paid. $60,000 a year, my mother proudly told me, as if announcing a promotion. "He's bringing real business expertise," she explained. "We can't expect him to volunteer like you do." I stared at her, stunned. 10 years. 10 years of grinding, bleeding, missing holidays, and now they were cutting checks for a man who didn't even know what G-code was. When Chad got his company truck, a brand new Ford F-150, I didn't even pretend to smile. "He needs reliable transportation for client visits," Dad said, handing him the keys. "You still have your old pickup, right?" I looked out the window at my rusted, 20-year-old Chevy with its cracked windshield. I didn't answer. I told myself it didn't matter. I was the engineer. He was just the figurehead. Let him play dress up. The clients knew who actually got the job done. I convinced myself the work would speak for itself. But slowly I saw something shift. During meetings, my parents began turning to him first. "Chad, what do you think of this?" "Chad, maybe you could handle the client presentation." I'd sit there, covered in cuts and bruises from the shop, watching him talk in circles. Words like scalability, efficiency matrix, digital footprint, and they'd nod like he was speaking gospel. Sometimes he'd glance at me mid-sentence, just long enough to flash that polite, empty smile that said, "You stay in your lane." One evening, I overheard Claire laugh, a sharp, condescending sound. "Olivia's the technical one," she said to Chad, "but Chad's the strategist. That's what keeps the business alive." That line cut deeper than any metal shard. Asterisk, you're the technician. He's the strategist. Asterisk, as if execution was meaningless. As if years of sweat and scars were less valuable than PowerPoint slides and buzzwords. This wasn't just favoritism. This was rewriting history, turning my labor into his legacy. I'd see posts online. Under Chad's leadership, Hart Metalworks enters a new era of innovation. My designs, my builds, my clients, all stamped with his name. My father would beam with pride. "He's got vision," he'd say. "Finally, someone who understands both sides of the business." Meanwhile, I was still sleeping in my childhood room above the garage, still driving a pickup that rattled every time I shifted gears, still waiting for the acknowledgement that never came. I told myself to ignore it, to keep working, to let the numbers, the output, the quality speak for me. But a quiet fear began to grow, because I'd seen this pattern before, in trade school, in every factory, in every meeting where I was the only woman at the table. The talkers rise while the workers fade into the background. For months, I bit my tongue, smiled through the injustice, told myself I was paranoid. But every day Chad stayed longer in the office, every meeting he led, every decision my parents deferred to him, made one truth sink deeper into my bones. I was being replaced. Not by someone better, but by someone who looked the part. My biggest threat wasn't incompetence. It was charm. Chad didn't need to outwork me. He just needed to outtalk me. And in a family where words carried more weight than sweat, I was already losing. It happened on one of those nights that blended into all the others, past midnight. The rest of the city asleep. The shop humming softly like a living thing. I was alone, as usual, reviewing QC files for a titanium order. The parts gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, perfect to the last micron. My hands were blackened with grease and ink. My brain on autopilot after 14 straight hours. All I wanted was to finish and go home. I pulled open the filing cabinet, and a folder slipped free, hitting the floor. When I bent to pick it up, I saw it, a red envelope, half hidden, boldly stamped confidential. It wasn't mine. I'd never seen it. Something about the way it was tucked away made my stomach tighten. I wiped my hands on a rag, sat down, and hesitated for a second before sliding my finger under the seal. Inside were legal documents, pages of formal text, and signatures that didn't make sense at first. Transfer of ownership was printed at the top, clean and final. I kept reading, my eyes moving faster as understanding began to dawn. The new owner of Heart Metal Works was Chad Walker. Not my father, not my mother, not me. My name didn't appear anywhere, except once, buried in an appendix labeled Employee List. The transfer had been signed, notarized, and dated 4 months earlier. My father's signature. My mother's. The ink looked fresh enough to still smell faintly of toner. My throat went dry. My chest constricted. It felt like the air had thickened around me. I flipped through the pages again and again, hoping I'd missed something. Maybe a clause, an addendum, a single line that included me. There was nothing. The hum of the machines in the background faded, replaced by the pounding of my own heartbeat. For years, I had believed I was working towards something bigger, that all the hours and sacrifices were bricks in a foundation I'd one day inherit. And now, on cheap white paper, I was being erased from that story entirely. I stared down at my hands, oil-stained, scarred, rough from a decade of metal and heat. These were the hands that built this place. Every machine, every fixture, every custom jig had passed through them. And yet, somehow they didn't count. My parents had chosen a man who couldn't tell a drill bit from a reamer over their own daughter. They had traded experience for image, sweat for charm, substance for show. The anger came fast, raw and hot. I slammed the folder shut, the echo sharp against the metal walls. But beneath the anger was something worse, a deep, aching grief. Not just for the loss of the business, but for the shattering realization that the people I trusted most had never truly seen me. I had spent a decade proving myself, and it still wasn't enough. I sat there for a long time, staring at the flickering light, replaying every conversation. The future of this place, that suddenly felt like a lie. When the clock hit 3 a.m., I made my decision. I was done. I pulled out a piece of company letterhead. My hand was shaking. To the management of Heart Metal Works, effective immediately, I resigned from my position. Good luck running this place without me. I signed it simply, Olivia Hart. When I set the pen down, a strange calm settled over me, the kind that comes right after a wound stops bleeding, when the pain is still there, but quieter. I folded the letter neatly and placed it on my father's desk, right beside the brass nameplate that still read, Owner. Then I walked through the shop one last time, tracing my fingers along the machines I'd maintained like old friends. The air smelled of steel and betrayal. I gathered a few things that mattered. My notebook of tool settings, a photo of Grandpa and me from my first day, and his welding gloves, stiff with age, but still fitting perfectly. He'd given them to me at 18, saying, "These gloves build things that last. Don't ever hand them to someone who doesn't know how to use them." I slipped them into my bag. When I stepped outside, Dawn was just breaking. The air was sharp, the sky streaked with gray and pale orange. For the first time in 10 years, I didn't have anywhere I needed to be. The parking lot was empty except for my old pickup, its hood dusted with frost. I climbed in, turned the key, and sat for a moment as the engine sputtered to life. My reflection in the windshield looked older than 32, eyes tired, face lined. A decade of exhaustion and disappointment carved into every feature. As I pulled out, I didn't look back. The shop lights glowed behind me, a distant hum fading into silence. My grandfather's gloves rested on the passenger seat. I placed my hands over them, whispering, "I'm sorry, Grandpa. I tried." Then I drove away, leaving behind the building that had once felt like home, but now felt like a grave. For the first time, the road stretched open, cold, uncertain but mine. 8 days passed, 8 long, quiet, disorienting days. The first few felt like I was detoxing from a life I didn't know had poisoned me. My body didn't understand what to do without the constant vibration of machines or the sharp tang of cutting fluid. I'd wake at 5 a.m. out of habit, a fleeting panic of being late, then remember there was nowhere to be. I was crashing at my friend Melissa's apartment above her bakery. She didn't ask questions, just left coffee on the counter and gave me space to breathe. For the first time in a decade, I smelled something other than metal. By the 8th day, I had almost stopped checking my phone. The silence from my parents was louder than any argument could have been. I told myself they wouldn't reach out, that they'd double down on their decision. I was wrong. That afternoon, helping Melissa carry flour bags, my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number, but my chest tightened anyway. I wiped my hands and answered, "Olivia." My father's voice cracked through the line. It wasn't the steady, commanding tone I grew up with. It was strained, uneven. "Thank God you picked up." I froze. "Dad, it's steel core dynamics," he blurted, words tumbling over each other. "They're threatening to pull their contract. Chad's been handling their last order, and the specs are off. They said the parts don't match the tolerances you used to run. They won't sign off until someone fixes it." His breath hitched. "We can't afford to lose them. That's 40% of our revenue. You have to come back." For a second, my old instincts kicked in. I could almost see the machine in my head, hear the spindle whirring wrong, feel the fix waiting in my fingertips. Every part of me wanted to grab my keys, drive to the shop and set things right. That's what I'd always done. Clean up their messes, make things work. But then I remembered that red envelope, the signatures, my name on that employee list, buried beneath the man who took everything I'd built. I took a deep breath. "I don't work there anymore," I said quietly. "Olivia." Dad snapped, his voice rising with panic. "This isn't about that right now. We need you. Chad needs you. He's trying, but he doesn't understand the technical side." "Then maybe he shouldn't be the owner of a machine shop," I cut in. My voice didn't shake. It came out calm, flat, final. There was a pause. I could hear him inhale like he was about to argue, then stop. For once, he had no quick fix, no authority to lean on. "Please," he said after a long silence. "We're drowning here." I stared out the window at the soft gray of late winter, the smell of yeast and cinnamon drifting from below. It struck me how different this air was, how clean it felt to breathe without oil and betrayal in it. "You made your choice," I said softly. "Let the air handle it." The silence that followed was deafening. I could almost picture him, surrounded by paperwork he didn't understand, Chad pacing beside him, trying to bluff his way through another disaster. When he didn't answer, I added, "Good luck, Dad." Then I hung up. For a moment, I just stood there, the phone still in my hand, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Not from fear this time, but from something sharper, something that felt like power. I turned the phone face down and exhaled, realizing my hands were shaking. Not because I was angry, but because for the first time in my life, I hadn't rushed back to fix things. I hadn't sacrificed myself for someone else's comfort. For 10 years, every boundary I had was blurred by obligation and guilt. But that one phone call, the plea in my father's voice, the quiet click of ending it, that became the line I'd never cross again. I wasn't their safety net anymore. I wasn't their unpaid labor or their invisible heir. I was just Olivia, and for the first time in a decade, that felt like enough. It was a gray Sunday morning, the kind where the sky looks like brushed metal. I was at Miller's Diner, a small spot that still served coffee in chipped mugs. I sat in my usual booth, eating scrambled eggs, trying to convince myself that this was what peace looked like. Quiet, unremarkable, ordinary. Then I saw them. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks. But when the door chimed, I froze mid-bite. My parents walked in, followed closely by Claire and Chad. My father's face was red, his jaw tight. My mother looked nervous. Claire had that look she always wore when she wanted to appear composed, but was barely holding it together. And Chad, of course, stood behind them. Perfectly pressed shirt, that smug little half-smile, like he was walking into a board meeting. He thought he'd already won. They spotted me immediately. My mother hesitated, whispering to my father, but he ignored her and marched straight toward my table. The diner went quiet. Forks paused midair. "Olivia," my father said, standing over me, his voice heavy with authority. "We need to talk." I didn't look up right away. I finished chewing, swallowed, and calmly set my fork down. "About what?" His voice rose. "About this childish behavior. About what you've done. The family needs you." I looked at him, genuinely confused. The family? Or the business? He blinked, not expecting the question. "They're the same thing," he said firmly. "Are they?" I asked, leaning back in the booth. "Because it didn't feel that way when you signed everything over to your son-in-law. Don't make this bigger than it is. You're blowing things out of proportion. Chad just wanted to help." I laughed. A short, humorless sound. "Help? He owns it, Claire. You call that helping?" Chad finally spoke, sliding his hands into his pockets, like he'd been waiting for his cue. "No one's saying you didn't contribute, Olivia, but no one is irreplaceable." The air in the diner thickened. I looked up at him, slowly meeting his eyes. "Is that right?" I said softly. "Then maybe you can tell me what a tolerant stack-up is." His confident expression flickered. "Excuse me." "You heard me," I said, my voice steady now. "Or maybe you can tell me the difference between a G2 and a G3 command. Or what coolant ratio you use for titanium versus 60-60, one aluminum." I paused. No, didn't think so. A few people in nearby booths had stopped pretending not to listen. Even the waitress paused. I leaned forward slightly. "Let me remind you of something, Chad. 93% of the CNC drawings in that shop were written by me. 40% of your current revenue came from Steelcore Dynamics, a contract I negotiated. Every custom jig, every precision part your team still uses was built by my hands. So tell me again who's replaceable." For a moment, no one spoke. Chad's face flushed, his mouth opening and closing like he was trying to find words that wouldn't come. My father slammed his hand down on the table, making the plates rattle. "That's enough. We didn't come here to argue technicalities. We came here to bring you home." I stared at his hand, at the veins pulsing beneath his skin, then looked up with a calm I didn't entirely feel. "Home." I repeated. "That stopped being home the moment you handed my life's work to someone who doesn't even know how to start a spindle." My mother's voice came next, soft and trembling. "Olivia, please. Your father's right. You've always been strong. You can build something anywhere. But Chad, he needs this opportunity. He needs the stability." Her words landed like a punch to the chest. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. "He needs stability," I said quietly. "Mom, I've spent 10 years holding that place together while everyone else took vacations and bonuses. I worked myself into the ground, and you're telling me he needs it more than I do." She looked down, unable to meet my eyes. Claire reached out, her tone falsely gentle. "Olivia, you can't be angry about this forever. It's business. You're brilliant at what you do. You'll land on your feet." I stood up slowly, the leather of the booth creaking. "You're right," I said. "I will." For a moment, the four of them stood there watching me, maybe waiting for me to apologize, to cave, to become the dependable daughter again. But I was done. I picked up my bag, set a few bills on the table for my uneaten breakfast, and turned to leave. As I walked past them, I stopped for just a second beside my mother. "You said he needs a chance," I said quietly. "Well, I gave you all 10 years of mine. Now it's my turn to walk away." I pushed open the diner door, the bell ringing sharply. The air outside was cold and clean, and for the first time in a long while I felt lighter. Behind me, I heard my father's voice, muffled through the glass, calling my name. I didn't turn around. The diner windows reflected the four of them standing together, confused, angry, and small. And for the first time in my life, I realized I didn't need their permission to leave. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine. By the next morning, I knew what I had to do. That leather notebook wasn't just nostalgia, it was a key. But for justice, sentiment wouldn't be enough. I needed proof, structure, and someone who could turn my grandfather's words into a weapon sharp enough to cut through legal paper. That's when I called Lena Mendoza. Lena and I had gone to the same technical college. She'd gone on to law school, opening her own firm in Milwaukee, specializing in business disputes. We hadn't spoken in years, but when she picked up, her voice was the same, brisk, confident, with a hint of warmth under professional steel. "Olivia Hart," she said. "It's been a decade. What's going on?" "Family business," I said dryly. "Literally." I told her everything. The unpaid years, the betrayal, the red envelope, the transfer papers, and finally, my grandfather's journal. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, there was a pause. "Send me everything," she said. "And, Olivia, don't talk to them again without me." 2 days later, I drove to her office. Modest. No marble floors, no perfect receptionist, just shelves stacked with binders and a framed degree. Lena was at her desk, hair tied back, glasses low on her nose, flipping through the documents I'd sent. When she looked up, her eyes were bright. "Okay," she said, tapping the folder. "We can do this, but we need to be smart. We have to prove 3 things. 1, that you are the technical backbone of the business. 2, that your parents' transfer to Chad violates your grandfather's founder intent. And 3, she paused, a small grin forming, that your dear brother-in-law is not only unqualified, but possibly committing financial misconduct." I exhaled. That last one shouldn't be too hard. The next few weeks were a blur. I became a detective in my own life, piecing together a trail of proof buried under years of loyalty. Every night I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by client emails, coffee-stained notebooks, a flash drive full of company data I'd saved. The first evidence was my track record. Hundreds of client emails, each a time-stamped footprint of my contribution. One from a steel core engineer. Olivia's precision saved our project. If she hadn't caught the misalignment, we'd have lost the entire prototype batch. Another from Aerodynamics Corp. "Olivia, your tolerance corrections are the reason we renewed this contract." Then came the numbers. Spreadsheets I'd built years ago. In 10 years, under my technical leadership, revenue had climbed 180%. Before that, barely 30%. The data spoke louder than any defense my parents could fabricate. But what truly sealed the pattern wasn't my success. It was Chad's failure. One night, Lena called after reviewing financial statements I'd found on an old company drive. "Olivia," she said, her tone almost amused, "your brother-in-law might just hand us this case himself." The company credit card history read like a parody. thousands in client entertainment that coincidentally matched Packers game dates, a $3,000 charge for networking dinners in Miami during a week when no trade conferences existed, and my personal favorite, a $5,000 home theater system labeled office equipment, shipped directly to Chad's address. Lena shook her head. You can't make this up. He's a walking audit violation. Still, she wanted more. We need internal witness statements. Something from people who've worked under both of you. Bonus points if they've seen him screw up firsthand. That's when I called David Clean, one of the oldest machinists. He'd started under my grandfather in the late 80s, seen every era of the business and now the decay. When I met him at a coffee shop, he looked older, but just as solid. I heard what happened, he said, shaking his head. Your grandfather would be sick over it. He pulled out an old file folder. I've been cleaning my garage. Found these contracts your granddad wrote himself. Look at the language. See how over the years he starts adding words like team share, collaborative ownership, collective equity. He was moving toward fairness, Olivia, not hierarchy. I flipped through the documents, my throat tightening. He really meant it, I whispered. David nodded. He used to say it all the time. Olivia's got my hands and my heart. She'll carry the shop forward one day. I never forgot that. When I brought the folder to Lena, she smiled. This, she said, holding up the page with Grandpa's evolving contract clauses, is gold. Founder intent, documented progression. Direct testimony from someone who worked beside him. Combined with your grandfather's journal, it's airtight. I stared at her, disbelief and relief fighting for space in my chest. So, we have enough. Lena closed the folder, leaned back. We have more than enough. The technical evidence proves your contribution. The financial records bury Chad. And your grandfather's words, they give us moral gravity the court will respect. She paused, then smiled faintly. Get some rest, Olivia, because the next time you walk into that building, it won't be as an employee. It'll be as the rightful heir of its soul. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. And when I woke up, I didn't feel small or erased anymore. I felt ready. The courthouse in Green Bay was a tall, gray building that looked like it had never known warmth. The steps echoed under my boots. My gait was steady, but my stomach was tight. Inside, everything smelled faintly of coffee and paper. Sterile, formal, unbending. Lena was near the end of the corridor, sleek in a navy suit, flipping through our files with calm precision. She looked up, saw me, and gave a short nod. You ready? She asked. As I'll ever be. She smiled slightly. Good, because today you stop being the invisible worker. Today they finally have to look at you. The courtroom was packed. Local press, a few old clients, even some former employees who'd heard about the case. My parents sat at the defendant's table beside Chad, who wore an expensive gray suit and the smug expression of a man convinced he could talk his way out of anything. My mother refused to meet my eyes. My father stared straight ahead, jaw tight. Judge Harris entered, a man in his 60s with sharp eyes and the posture of someone who'd seen every kind of human foolishness. Case number 24 to 315. Hart versus Walker. Let's begin. Lena rose first. Her voice was steady, crisp, deliberate. Your Honor, this case is not about inheritance. It's about integrity. It's about a woman who gave 10 years of her life to a business built by her grandfather, only to be erased from its future. We will show that Olivia Hart was the technical and operational core of Hart Metal Works, that the transfer of ownership to Chad Walker violated documented founder intent, and that Mr. Walker is unfit to run the business due to both incompetence and financial misconduct. Then she began the presentation. The first exhibit, a page from my grandfather's leather notebook, the handwriting elegant and firm. Whoever builds with their hands and mind owns a piece of the workshop's soul. The courtroom was silent. Next, photographs, my 12-year-old self welding under Grandpa's supervision. Rows of machines I had calibrated. Client thank you emails praising my precision. Then spreadsheets. 10 years of data showing the company's 180% growth during my leadership of technical operations. Finally, the financial statements, each with highlighted charges. Packers tickets, a business retreat in Miami, a $5,000 home theater system labeled office equipment. Lena said softly, all charged to company funds. The audience murmured. When it was my turn, she called me to the stand. My palms were cold, but my voice was steady. I described the last decade. 80-hour weeks, oil burns, sleepless nights, fixing machines others couldn't. I thought I was investing in my future, I said quietly. My parents told me I was working for something that would one day be mine. I didn't realize I was building a throne for someone else. Then came Chad's turn. He strutted to the witness stand, flashing his practiced smile. His lawyer began gently. Mr. Walker, could you explain your role at Hart Metal Works? Chad straightened. I modernized the company's marketing, introduced digital strategy, and brought us into the 21st century. Before me, there was no online presence, no outreach. Lena stood. Cross-examination, Your Honor. Judge Harris nodded. Proceed. She approached slowly like a surgeon. Mr. Walker, you claim to have modernized operations. Could you please name 3 clients you personally brought into the company during your tenure? Chad blinked. Well, I was building relationships. These things take time. Names, Lena pressed. He hesitated. I'd have to check the records. Lena tilted her head. Very well. Then, for the record, can you describe the process of setting up a CNC mill for a precision titanium order? A pause. That's not really my area of focus. I delegate that to the operators. Lena's tone didn't change. And yet you are the sole owner of a machining business, correct? He shifted in his seat. Yes, but I handle the big picture. Leadership isn't about, she cut him off. What was the company's quarterly revenue as of last quarter? He frowned. Well, again, I'd need to confirm. So you don't know the answer? Not off the top of my head. Lena turned to the judge. Your Honor, this man cannot name a single client, cannot describe the process that produces his company's product, and cannot identify basic financial metrics. Yet he claims to lead this business. She faced Chad again, her voice like ice. Mr. Walker, a company cannot be led by someone who doesn't understand how it runs. The courtroom was silent except for the faint squeak of the judge's pen. When Lena sat down, I caught the faintest flicker of panic cross my father's face. My mother reached for his hand, but he pulled away. For the first time, they looked unsure. Not angry, not defensive, just small. After a brief recess, Judge Harris turned to me. Miss Hart, before I render my decision, would you like to make a final statement? I stood. My legs trembled, but my voice didn't. Your Honor, I'm not here to reclaim property. I'm here to reclaim truth. My grandfather believed that work gives people dignity, that what you build with your hands and your heart belongs to you, at least in spirit. I don't need the company. I don't need the name. I just want his intent honored. And I want to stop men like Chad from turning honest labor into someone else's profit. For a long moment, the judge said nothing. He looked down at the notebook in front of him, then at me. Thank you, Miss Hart. When I sat back down, Lena whispered, that was perfect. As the gavel struck, signaling that judgment would be delivered in 3 days, I realized something profound. Win or lose, I had already done what my grandfather had wanted me to do. I had stood my ground. My hands were steady, and my heart unshakably my own. 3 days later, I stood once again in that cold, echoing courtroom. My palms were damp, but my heart was steady. The air felt heavier, that quiet, suspended kind of stillness that comes right before something irreversible. My parents sat a few rows ahead. Claire beside them, her arms folded tightly, eyes red as if she hadn't slept. Chad stared straight ahead, jaw tense, his arrogance finally cracked. When Judge Harris entered, everyone rose. He settled into his chair, adjusted his glasses, and glanced over the thick stack of files in front of him. My grandfather's notebook, Lena's evidence binders, the company ledgers, the photographs. His voice, when it came, was low, but carried through the room like a verdict written in stone. "I have reviewed all evidence and testimony presented in this case," he began. "This matter concerns not merely a business transaction, but the question of legacy and the responsibilities that come with it." He paused, scanning the courtroom. The late founder of Hart Metal Works, Mr. Robert Hart, left behind clear written philosophies reflecting his belief that ownership should align with labor and contribution. While not a formal legal will, his journals and corroborating testimony from long-term employees established clear founder intent. I held my breath. "Furthermore," he said, "the plaintiff, Olivia Hart, has provided compelling evidence demonstrating her role as the primary technical and operational driver of the business over the past decade. Testimonial statements and client correspondence confirm that approximately 93% of products and operations were directly under her supervision or design. Statistical data shows significant growth during her tenure." He shifted his gaze toward Chad. "Conversely, evidence indicates that the defendant, Mr. Chad Walker, engaged in financial misconduct and lacked both the qualifications and technical understanding required to manage this company. His use of company funds for personal expenses further undermines his fitness as an owner." My stomach tightened as I watched Chad's confident posture crumble. "Therefore," the judge said, each word deliberate, "the court finds the transfer of ownership to Mr. Walker invalid. The succession plan is hereby nullified as inconsistent with founder intent and inequitable to the primary contributor." A ripple moved through the courtroom. A soft gasp, the sound of a pen dropping. But the judge wasn't finished. "However," he continued, "given the current state of Hart Metal Works, including operational collapse, loss of major clients, and outstanding debts, the court orders that the business be appraised, liquidated, and sold. After debts are paid and any misused company funds are reimbursed by Mr. Walker, the remaining proceeds shall be divided equally between the founder's two biological children, Miss Olivia Hart and Miss Claire Hart." He looked directly at me. "Miss Hart, this court recognizes your immeasurable contribution and your grandfather's intent that your work be honored. But it also recognizes the reality that the business, as it stands, cannot recover. What remains will allow you to start anew." He struck the gavel once, a firm, final echo. "Court is adjourned." The sound felt like both an ending and a clean break. For a long moment, no one moved. My father stared down at the table, his hands trembling slightly. My mother's face was pale, blank, not angry anymore, just hollow. Claire leaned toward her husband, whispering something sharp that made him flinch. Lena exhaled beside me, gathering her papers. Her eyes softened when she turned toward me. "You won," she said quietly. I nodded, but the words didn't feel like victory. "I know." Outside, the afternoon light was cold and bright against the courthouse steps. I stood there for a while, letting it hit my face, letting the noise of the world replace the silence of judgment. Reporters lingered, murmuring, but no one approached. I think they could tell this wasn't the kind of story that ended with celebration. 2 months later, after the sale and deductions for debt and restitution, I received the final number, $63,000. It arrived by direct deposit with a one-line email from Lena, settlement complete. "Congratulations, Olivia." I stared at the number for a long time. It wasn't a fortune, but it was freedom. Enough to breathe, to start over, enough to build something small, and this time mine alone. But there was no joy. Not really. Just a long, quiet exhale. That night, I sat in my apartment with a single lamp on and opened my grandfather's notebook again. The pages were smudged from my fingers, soft at the edges. I ran my hand over his handwriting, his words still echoing. Whoever builds with their hands and mind owns a piece of its soul. I whispered into the stillness. I did build it, Grandpa. I just didn't get to keep it. The next morning, Lena called. You okay? She asked. I think so, I said after a pause. I won the case, but it feels like I lost something bigger. She was quiet for a moment. You didn't lose it, she said finally. You outgrew it. After we hung up, I drove past the old factory one last time. The sign had already been taken down. The windows empty, the loading bay locked. It looked smaller than I remembered. Not the kingdom I'd once thought it was, but just a building of steel and concrete. The ghosts were gone, and so was I. As I drove away, the horizon opened up ahead, wide and clean. And though the ache was still there, that hollow space where my family used to be, I felt something else rising in its place. Not revenge, not triumph, just clarity. I hadn't fought for ownership. I had fought for truth, for the right to stand beside my grandfather's memory and say, I kept my part of the promise. And maybe that was enough. 6 months after the verdict, the dust of everything I'd lost had finally started to settle. And from it, something new began to take shape. I signed a short-term lease on a small industrial space in Ashwaubenon, just outside Green Bay. It wasn't much to look at. Bare concrete floors, a cracked roll-up door, walls that still smelled faintly of motor oil. But when I stood in the middle of it, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. With part of the settlement money, I bought 2 used CNC mills, 1 lathe, and a small TIG welder. Machines that others called outdated. But to me, they were familiar, loyal, almost alive. I painted the walls a dull gray, replaced the flickering lights, and hung a new sign by the door that read, Heartsteel Core. The name wasn't just business. It was reclamation. I wasn't trying to resurrect my grandfather's company. I was honoring its soul. For the first few weeks, it was just me, the hum of the machines, and the smell of cutting oil. I worked long hours again, but this time every sound of the spindle, every spark, every vibration meant freedom, not servitude. Then one morning my phone rang. The number was familiar, though it took me a second to believe it. Olivia, this is Wayne from Steelcore Dynamics. I nearly dropped my wrench. Steelcore, the same client my father had begged me to save. We heard you've opened your own shop, Wayne said. We've had quality issues with the new supplier. We'd like you to take over production again. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The memory of that first call, my father's voice trembling in panic, flashed through me. Only this time it was my phone ringing. My shop they needed. I'd be happy to, I said. My voice was calm, even. Send me the specs. That contract became my lifeline. Then the orders kept coming. One client, then another. Within a few months, the machines were running full shifts again. When I hired my first employee, it wasn't even a decision. It was instinct. Caroline, my old quality control lead, walked into the shop one morning, hair tied back, safety goggles hanging from her neck. I heard you're hiring, she said, smiling, and I'm tired of fixing other people's mistakes. I laughed. Welcome home. With Caroline back, everything clicked into place. Her eye for detail matched mine. Her presence filled the gaps I hadn't realized were empty. Together, we rebuilt from nothing, tightening tolerances, winning contracts, earning trust the only way I knew how, by showing up and doing the work right. By the 6th month, we were profitable. By the 8th, we had more orders than we could handle. The sound of metal cutting through metal, once a symbol of exhaustion, had become music. 1 year later, I got another call, this time from Andrew Harland, the new owner of the old Hart Metalworks property. We're liquidating the remaining equipment, he said. I heard you used to work here. Thought you might want first pick before we scrap it all. A strange ache stirred in my chest. I'll come by, I told him. The building looked different when I pulled up. Emptier, hollowed out. The big sign gone, offices stripped bare. Dust floated in thick beams of light through the high windows. Rows of machines stood quiet, like old soldiers waiting to be put to rest. Andrew led me through the floor, pointing out what was left. Most of this is outdated, he said. We'll just auction it off. But there's one old CNC mill in the back corner, your grandfather's. I think we were going to scrap it. The thing barely runs. When I saw it, I froze. There it was, the first machine my grandfather had ever bought. The one I'd learned on when I was 12, standing on a crate just to reach the controls. Its frame was scratched, the paint flaking, the buttons dulled by decades of touch. Andrew shrugged. It's worthless in production terms. But if you want it, you can take it. Consider it a return home. I ran my fingers over the cold metal, feeling the faint grooves where my grandfather's hands had once been. I'll take it, I said quietly. It took 2 weeks of long nights to restore that machine. I replaced the bearings, recalibrated the drive motors, polished every inch until it gleamed again. I didn't do it for output. It was too slow for modern work. But because it deserved to live, because he deserved to live through it. When I finally powered it up, the screen flickered, the motor hummed, and I swore I could almost hear my grandfather's voice. Listen to the rhythm, Olivia. The machine always tells you what it needs. I placed the old mill in the brightest corner of my new shop, where the morning light hit it first. That became my favorite spot, the soul of the place. One afternoon, David, the retired machinist who had testified for me, stopped by. He stood silently for a long moment, eyes tracing the familiar shape of the machine. Then he reached out, placed his weathered hand on its frame, and smiled. Your grandfather would be proud of you, he said softly. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I don't need them to admit it anymore, I said. I have my own shop now, and it still carries his name. He smiled, eyes misting. That's how legacy really works, kid. You don't inherit it, you rebuild it. That night, after everyone left, I turned off the lights, leaving only the glow of the old CNC mill in the corner. The hum of its motor filled the silence like a heartbeat. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of it settle through me. Fairness doesn't always come from those who share your blood. Sometimes it's forged by your own hands. When you finally claim what you deserve, build your own table, and when you do, open it for those who were once left outside. Have you ever been overlooked or dismissed in your own family or your own work, just because they didn't believe you could do it? Tell me what you think. I really want to know.